Hey everyone, and welcome to our first ever podcast video from Club Mutt Productions.
Awesome!
Thanks, I'm your host Matt Lloyd, and welcome to our first Is There Anybody Out There podcast video in this series. So, why a paranormal podcast? Well, I've always had an interest in parapsychology and have carried out many parapsychology investigations over the years, both as part of a group and also organised by myself as part of a small team. The idea behind this series of podcasts is simple. Once a month I will travel around the UK to an alleged haunted location where I will carry out a paranormal investigation. I will usually have a friend or two with me to assist in the investigation. I plan to record as much as possible on location and then to record a podcast video after the investigation to cover where we went, what alleged hauntings have been reported, what we've seen and experienced, or what we didn't see or experienced as the case may be. So, just to make things clear for everyone, whilst we're recording our podcasts, we'll also be videoing them to go on our website, social media channels and Facebook group. Okay, so a bit about me. As you can probably see, I'm using a teleprompter on my laptop. Reason for this, got lots of different memory problems due to sleep deprivation over a prolonged period of time. Anyway, I have a diploma in psychology, diploma in higher education and adult nursing, and a diploma in parapsychology as well as a level 2 certificate in parapsychology. I have been involved in over 50 paranormal investigations over the years. Some of these were part of a group organised by another person, and others were organised by myself as part of a small team. I've attended around 7 different spiritual churches over a number of occasions and have had several readings from mediums. I describe myself as both a believer and a skeptic, as I've witnessed things that I cannot yet explain, even with my interest in quantum physics, but I do also believe that around 95% of reported paranormal experiences can be explained easily by science. So the format of these paranormal podcasts is simple. We'll start with an introduction as to whom is appearing on this particular podcast. Then we'll go into a parapsychology lesson of the show where we cover a different area within parapsychology each show. Then we'll have an introduction into the paranormal investigation the show will cover, so where the location was, what paranormal activity had been reported there, the investigation we carried out, and what was witnessed, if any activity was witnessed. This will involve a discussion with all of the people who were present on the paranormal investigation, who will appear on the podcast video as guests. Finally, we'll have any paranormal stories sent in by the viewers and listeners, followed by contact details for listeners and viewers to send in your paranormal stories or experiences for us to read out on the show. So, when I was younger, I lived in an allegedly haunted house where a lot of unexplained things took place. When we went to view it, everything that could go wrong did go wrong. But my sister had just been born, I was 3, my parents needed to move out of a 2-bedroom bungalow into a 3-bedroom property. I remember the day before we moved in, it was terrible. I don't know if it really happened or if it was a nightmare, but I remember being in bed, in my bedroom asleep, when I suddenly woke up and a cream foam back and cushion of a chair popped out at the bottom of my bed and started shaking, coming towards me. As I'd just woken up, and I was only 3, I was a bit confused as to what was going on until it touched the bottom of my foot and kept coming towards me. Now, I know before I went to bed I tidied my toys up because my parents always used to make me tidy up my toys before going to bed and put the toy box against the wall in my bedroom. They always made me do that. But do you know, as soon as I jumped out of bed and I ran to the door, I tripped over my toy box, which was now between the bed and the door. That stunned me to start with, and I was a little bit confused. But when I got to the door, I couldn't get the door open. I just remember banging on the door, screaming for my mum and dad, and that's where the memory of the incident fades away. I can't remember what happened after that. But the following day we moved into the new house without any incident or problems. Unfortunately, it didn't take long for strange things to start happening in relation to the house. A lot of these events were told to me later by my parents, particularly my mother, as she spent most of the time in my house because my dad was an engineer and he'd work long hours during the week. The first thing I remember my mother telling me about was the kettle incidents. When my mum took my sister with me in the morning to walk me to nursery, my mum would get back home to find the kettle boiling. Now, to start with, she just thought she must have switched it on before she left to take me to nursery, because the nursery was down the end of the road, about a 5-minute walk there and back, even with the pram. However, it wasn't long before my mum realised that something wasn't right. Each time she got home from taking me to nursery, she would get home to find the kettle was boiling. She'd turn it off at the socket before leaving for nursery the following morning and get home to find the socket turned back on and the kettle boiling. She even tried unplugging it at one point and got back home from nursery. It was unplugged, but it was still boiling when she walked into the house. A few weeks after we moved into the house, my mum would be downstairs in the hallway and she'd see out the corner of her eye a group of Roman soldiers from the waist up, marching across the hallway, coming out of one wall and disappearing into the opposite wall. Every time she turned around to look at them, they'd simply just vanish into thin air. Now, as you can imagine, this was somewhat disconcerting, and to start with, she just put it down to being tired and seeing things. But she wasn't convinced after she'd seen them from the corner of her eye for a second time a few weeks later. She experienced this for several more times over a number of years. When we first moved into the house, I recall my wallpaper being a pattern involving spirals which were repeated as a pattern. My parents had to change the wallpaper soon after moving in because it used to keep me awake at night. They just used to move in a circular motion all the time. And it just used to give me nightmares and keep me awake. Again, I don't know, being only just over 3, I can't explain what was happening. I was too young to investigate at the time. Anyway, as we got to settle into the house, my parents got to know the neighbours. They got chatting to one set of neighbours who'd lived there for over 30 years. And that's when they started to find out the reality behind the house. Basically, none of the families that had previously lived at the house had ever moved out of the house as a complete family. Now, I remember a chill going up my spine as my mum related to me a conversation she had with one of the neighbours, the same ones that lived on the street for 30 years. Now, according to that neighbour, every family that had ever lived in a house we were now living in had split up before moving out of the house. It seemed no one family had ever left the house as a complete family. Usually, after a few years, the parents would end up splitting up, and one would move out and either take the children with them, or the children would stay in the house with the other parent, and then a year or so the house would be put up for sale. Now, luckily for us, my parents were both very strong-minded and genuinely madly in love with each other. So when we moved out of the house, we were the first family to move out of the house as a complete family. But the house didn't allow us to move out without a whole host of obstacles to overcome. But anyway, the first few years I was blamed by my parents for moving and hiding things in the house, which I didn't, by the way. But things would go missing: my dad's wallet, my mum's car keys, books, just about anything that was small. The item would go missing from one part of the house and then turn up, sometimes hours later, days later, weeks later, sometimes even months later, in a completely different part of the house. Now, after a few years of denials, my parents finally believed that I had nothing to do with the disappearing items, especially as more and more strange things continued to happen in the house. Now, don't get me wrong, it was nothing like Poltergeist or other movies, although on one occasion it did come close. It was just lots of relatively small, strange things constantly happening. My parents even resorted to getting a local priest in to bless the house. Now, I remember he turned up with a Bible, some crosses to place around the house, and I think some holy water. After he'd done what he needed to do, everything seemed to quieten down for a few months. Then my dad noticed that there was something wrong with the house and got a surveyor in, who said that we had a problem of some sort with the foundations and we'd have to move out for a month whilst they did remedial building work. I remember that as soon as we moved out and into the hotel the insurance company had arranged for us, I suddenly started experiencing strong abdominal pains. I was taken to hospital, carried out with tests and given pain relief, and finally diagnosed with abdominal migraines, which I'd never heard of while I was very young, never experienced before. Anyway, after a week I was discharged back to the hotel with pain relief. But the pains continued throughout our stay at the hotel, and they didn't stop until we went back to the house after the building work had been completed, and I never experienced them again. So, I don't know, it was very strange. Excuse me. Now, when I said earlier that it wasn't like movies such as Poltergeist, it did come close on one occasion. Now, I do recall A few weeks after we moved back into that house, I was in bed, in my bedroom, when I suddenly heard my mum screaming, panicked, my dad's name. Mike! Mike! And then she went, oh my God! I jumped out of bed. I went out of the bedroom, I ran downstairs, I walked into the living room, and I couldn't believe what I was seeing. My dad was sat in his chair in the corner of the lounge, frothing from the mouth, with his head twisting right round to one side as far back as it would go, and then twisting round to the other side as far back as it would go. And I remember thinking, if it twisted any further back, it'd break his neck. Anyway, my mum called an ambulance. They soon turned up. Didn't take long in those days for an ambulance to arrive. You didn't have to wait long. My dad was rushed to hospital whilst a good neighbour looked after me and my sister. My mum went with him in the ambulance. Anyway, the doctors carried out loads of tests and in the end put it down to my dad having an epileptic fit, which he's never had before and he's never had since. So, another unexplained incident. But who knows? After that, my parents approached the same priest as last time and requested a further blessing of the house. A few weeks later, the priest attended the house to carry out another blessing. He got halfway around the house this time when a cross was flung off the nail on the wall it was hanging from and almost hit him in the face, where he left very quickly and he never came back. He refused to ever come back to the house after that. So now you're probably all saying, well, if this is true and you had such a hard time, why didn't you just put up the house for sale and move out? Well, my parents tried. You see, we moved into the house when I was 3 and we eventually sold it and moved out when I was around 12. But my parents had put the house up for sale around 4 years after we moved in. It just took a further 5 years to eventually sell it. We spent a total of 9 years living in that house. Then it came to the day we were due to move out. My parents had sold the house and decided, due to my mum's deteriorating health, to relocate to the coast. The plan was simple. They'd sold the house, all our furniture would go into storage, we would take our caravan to a local caravan site and live there over the Christmas period because we was moving out in mid-December. Then we'd take the caravan down to a site in mid-January near the southwest coast and stay there until we'd found somewhere to buy and move into. So the day we were due to move out came and the large removal van we had booked broke down before it even got to us, so they sent 2 smaller vans. That delayed moving out. Anyway, once all the furniture had been packed and the 2 vans had finally gone, I remember we was outside the front of the house as my dad was connecting the caravan to the car's tow hitch. We had an estate Volvo at the time and the back door was open. Our dog was still in the house and my dad was connecting the caravan to the car when suddenly there was this blood-curdling howl and the dog came running out of the house, dived into the back of the car and lay down, physically shaking. We all just looked at each other and my dad said to my mum, get that front door shut and let's get out of here. We finally got to pull off the drive and down the road where we got 100 yards before this strange noise started coming from the back of the car, between the car and the caravan. So we pulled over and despite having done it up very tightly, the jockey wheel had come down and started rubbing the rubber away on the wheel. So my dad again lifted it up, tightened the clamp up as tight as he could. That seemed to rectify it. And we got to the campsite about 10 miles away without any further incidents or problems. Now, the house was on a road that had a set of woods at either end of it. Not long after we moved out of the house, archaeologists started to excavate both sets of woods, suspecting that they were both Roman camps. It then transpired that they suspected the Roman road that had linked the 2 woods ran directly beneath the house we had lived in. Now, I'm not sure how deep the builders had to dig to sort out the foundations of the house, but they never reported seeing anything when they carried out the digging to sort the foundations out. But my mum did say the Roman soldiers she saw were from the waist up, so I can only surmise that the Roman road was slightly deeper than the builders had dug. So, have any of you out there got any paranormal experiences or stories that you'd like to share with us? If so, please get in touch with us by emailing us at badgerentertainmentsevents@mail.com. That's all lowercase, all one word, badgerentertainmentsevents@mail.com. So, let us know your experiences and stories and we can share them with viewers and listeners on our next podcast, which will be later this month. Well, that's all for now. Thank you so much for listening or watching. We hope that you'll tune in next time for our next paranormal podcasting video, Is There Anybody Out There? Details of when that will be released will be on our social media and our website. So please search for Club Map Productions on Facebook for our Facebook group, and also check out our website at www.clubmapproductions.co.uk, all lowercase, www.clubmapproductions.co.uk. Thanks again, and goodbye for now.